Hi, everybody. Welcome to another weekly installation of business tips that hopefully help you move forward with your goals. My name is Meryl Stewart. I'm the CEO of Marketing and Business Solutions. And today I wanted to talk about storytelling. I work with a lot of clients, especially on the marketing side of things, and it always starts with a story about how they need help, a story about how we might be able to help them, a story about a challenge or something that they're celebrating. And I think about when we look at how to market a business or how to market a nonprofit, we are always starting with how do we tell the story better, and are we connecting with the right members of the audience to hear that story? And so I wanted to talk today about some of the components of good storytelling and some of the things to think about as you're crafting a story for your cause or your business. When I worked in the radio stations, I worked in the promotions department, and there was a point in time where I worked with a team that was producing some shows on air. And I remember being on a couple live broadcasts and being part of those teams. And at one point, I think I was even the producer. But the point being is that radio is kind of the ultimate theater of the mind. And if you can't describe what's going on in a vivid enough way, it's really hard for the audience to connect. We would have high school football games that we'd be broadcasting from, and the on sideline reporter would be talking about, as you can see, this is happening, and as you can see, that's happening, and the audience can't see anything. It's radio, so it became really apparent to me that part of what is involved in a good story is really some of those details and really building for people, your audience, a picture, something that they can relate to, something they can emotionally connect to help them remember it and recall it, but also feel connected enough to want to do something. So, good storytellers inject emotion in their stories. They weave in feelings, they weave in descriptions of places, what something might feel like. They try to tell people about happiness and fear and sadness, things that as a person that you could relate to, so that you can kind of follow the journey of a character or the individual or group that you're talking about in your story, that someone can connect with on some level. So it's really important to be thinking about that as you're starting to develop your story, or even maybe tweak a story that you already have, so that you can just better communicate those emotions to your audience. The other thing to think about with storytelling is that you really want to connect um, with the audience in a way where you're building rapport, where you're building trust, where you're building something that they're going to connect with and feel that they want to act on. I was, kind of preparing for this and looking at a lot of different ways that people talk about telling stories, and then weaving in some ways that we also recommend that. And one of the things that kind of isn't mentioned often is really what happens at the end. What happens after you tell the story and what you want people to do. So I'm going to give you some thoughts about that as we go through this process. So structuring your story looks like this. It starts with knowing who you're talking to. So you can have the same story that you tell multiple ways to different audiences. So you don't necessarily need to recreate it, but you definitely have to know who you're talking to, because you want to be sensitive to what it is that you're saying and how you're saying it. The story also begins when you're telling a story before you get to the main event. So don't start by telling people what the main thing is that's going to happen, or the main problem that's going to get solved in the story. You have to kind of give people background first before you get to that main kind of point in the story, which is really the climax of the story. So when you start a story, start thinking about, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, all those great question words that we learned about so long ago. But they're important because they set up in the person's, mind, who you're talking to, an understanding of who are the characters, or what is the situation that the characters is currently in, and why are they in that situation. So it's almost kind of foreshadowing a little bit what's gonna be coming. But if you kind of start with those questions, why is the situation that your character is in important, and what is it? And then what other information do you need to share with your audience about the characters, or kind of the description of where you're headed in this story that will help them appreciate the rest of the story. So, when we work with nonprofit organizations, a lot of times they're telling a story about maybe a client who has gone through a recovery situation, or maybe they've needed financial assistance for something. And so helping the reader or the audience understand that this is maybe a family that the parents have lost their jobs, and they're in a situation that they didn't expect, that they were hardworking individuals and are looking for work, but just haven't been able to find something because of whatever circumstances. That at least helps people understand where you're starting from. Then you can kind of go backward in time, into kind of what was happening with them before they lost their jobs, and then what's going to happen moving forward that will help them maybe reconnect with resources that they may need. So it's important to kind of give a little bit of perspective on where you're trying to take your audience. So the pattern of a story is something that is pretty consistent no matter what kind of story you tell, or a story you read, or maybe your favorite story that you've read or listened to. But you first start with the background. So like we said, starting with what is the situation? Why is it important? Introducing those characters so that people kind of have a little background information. The second part is how the story started. So, like I was saying in this other example, maybe this family had been working, had, spent a long time working at their positions or their jobs, and now they're in a situation that they weren't expecting. And once you kind of start the story so that you kind of capture the audience to, oh my gosh, what happened? What's going to happen next? Are they going to get help? Are they going to get what they need? You're starting to draw them in. The third part is really building the sequence of events until you hit that point of no return. So, they were working, a number of different things happened, and you can talk about those things. And you don't want to talk about them in a factual perspective. You don't want to just list facts and say, okay, he worked here, she worked there, they did this, whatever. You want to be able to talk about how they felt about it. Were they excited about the places they were working, or were they engaged in the environments that they were in? What was it like for their family? What was it like for their lives? What were they able to do because they had those positions, whatever that looks like. And build to the point where, and then something happened that was, drastic, unexpected, maybe, something that saddened them, or from an emotional standpoint, put them in a different position. And that, build up to that point is called the climax. That climax is that point of no return, the point where, okay, something now has to change because it's going to be different moving forward. We're not necessarily going back the way we came. So from that climax, you want to start telling, winding down and start telling the final events of the story. So what happens? So let's just say they both lose their jobs. They're both looking for work. What do they do next? Maybe they reach out to an organization that has resources so that they can, do job searching and get back on their feet. Maybe they reach out to, family and friends, or some other entity to help them. And so it's kind of describing what's happening in that process for them, how they feel about it, how it's impacting their lives, what they're learning new about themselves, or maybe something new for their family that's positive. So how are you moving them from, where they started through something that was challenging, and now into a place where there's maybe growth or change or opportunity, or something that is, positive or change in nature. And then the fifth piece of this is to talk about the consequences or the next step. So, how did the situation change, or what was accomplished? You want to help the audience understand that, it's not necessarily there's a happy ending to every story, but there is change in people, and that can be a good or bad thing. And so, when you're telling about that change, the last part of that I will add to this, because I think it's really important, and I alluded to this before, is that call to action. So, okay, now that your audience knows about a need or something that can be accomplished, or an opportunity that can be gained, how can they be a part of it? How can they do something about it? and this applies to sales as well for for-profit organizations. These stories are important because it's the foundation typically of your marketing and communications plan. It aligns with the values of your company or your organization, and you have to be able to tell what you do as a business and why it's important that you continue to do it. You need to be able to communicate that to gain new customers, to retain the ones you have, and to be able to tell success stories and even bring your employees together. So storytelling is really a vital part of that. But in that situation, in a for-profit situation, you still want people to do something. You want your customers to come back. You want to be able to convince new customers that they should, utilize you or engage you in some fashion. You also want to be able to, retain your employees, help them feel good about the place that they're working, help them feel like they're part of something that is doing something good for others. And so it's really important to tell the story in a fashion that will help those audiences connect to it. On the nonprofit side, that call to action might be more related to fundraising. And so the storytelling piece is just as critical in the for profit world as it is in nonprofit because you still need it for your marketing. You still need it as that foundational basis for communications. And you absolutely need it if you're going to ask people to spend money and invest in your mission. So, being able to talk from the standpoint of a person that has experienced something and can talk about that in a way that connects people to wanting to learn more or wanting to give or volunteer their time is really critical to the life of a nonprofit organization. So, kind of thinking about this, you're many times organizations and companies tell a story from the company or the organization's point of view. From, I am so and so organization or I am so and so company, and we do this, and this is why it's important, and you should do that. That's not as impactful as if you talk about it from the perspective of someone who's actually experienced something within your company or from your organization. So, telling a story from your employee's point of view, telling a story from a customer's point of view, like a testimonial, telling a story from maybe a client or a volunteer's perspective, if you're an organization, or even a donor's perspective is really important because one, it gives more credibility to your audience that you're not just, full of yourself and talking about yourself because you like to hear yourself tell your own story, but that there's others invested and others impacted by what it is that you do. So that storytelling piece is really critical for that element. And some final thoughts that I'll leave you with is that it's one, really important to build rapport. That trust that you build will have people continuing to follow you, continuing to want to come back to hear more stories and engage in some way. Your tone is incredibly important. It needs to be appropriate, it needs to be respectful, but it also needs to be engaging. You have to be able to describe and talk through a story in a way that people are going to relate to it and connect with it. And you want to create that connection between you and your audience. You want them coming back for more. You want them to ask you questions. You want them to understand or be interested in what happens next. And remember that people support people, whether they're buying something from your company or they're supporting your nonprofit. They support it because something is happening to someone that they can relate to, or a problem that they have that they need solved, or help that they need to gain from you. So when you're talking to your audience, just remember that you're talking to other people and they think and they feel just like you do. And that's really important as you're telling your story. So I hope this was helpful today. If you have any comments, as always, or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to respond to you and help you kind of take those next steps in telling your story. If you need help on a deeper level with that, we're always here. You can reach out and talk to us about engaging us in helping you. And for more information about what we do, you can go to www.mymabs.com. And I'll look forward to hearing back from you all and look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye bye.